live sport is the genre in the broadcast schedule that has consistently driven audience ratings. And as such, it's long been the testing ground for innovation in TV, 3D being no exception. The world's first 3D channel, Sky 3D, went on air in October 2010 with the Ryder Cup live from Celtic Manor in Ireland. Even before then, the BBC can claim to have aired the first live 3D satellite transmission of rugby's Calcutta Cup match from Murrayfield in 2008. Sky has since broadcast more than 350 live sports events, including 250 live soccer matches, and it's continually expanding the range of sports it covers, most recently to include basketball and Formula One. There's no doubt that sport watched in 3D can get a viewer closer to the action, and we have three architects of its production to tell us how they do it and what's going to come next. So allow me to introduce our guests. To my left here, Duncan Humphreys is Creative Director at Can Communicate, which was the 3D production facility which helped the BBC deliver the first live 3D satellite transmission. Duncan has been integral to live 3D broadcasts of Wimbledon and to the coverage of the 2010 World Cup in 3D. Robin Broomfield can be described as one of the founding fathers of Sky 3D. He continues to be responsible for the development of the facilities and the systems for creating live 3D content at Sky. And Steve Smith is Senior Director of Sport at BSkyB, with hundreds of events, including dozens of 3D Premiership soccer matches under his belt. If anyone knows what works and what doesn't in 3D, it's Steve. So Robin, I'm going to start with you if I may. I wondered if you could assess for us the progress that Sky has made in terms of 3D sports over the last 2.5 years, perhaps bringing up some of the technical evolution and the creative evolution, and perhaps some of the challenges that you've overcome.
Thanks, Adrian. It's been it's technical, it's skills based, reliability. I think from when we started, one of the main things that's happened has been reliability. The equipment we're using is better. The 3reality systems have improved. The new SIP, when it came online, has helped us make sure that the rigs stay aligned better. There's less failure during our productions, and that's been a big step forward. Skills base has improved. We've got a really good team with Telegenic running our trucks. The stereography side, the management of the 3D parameters, the depth and the volume. I think we've learned over the last 2.5 years how to manage that better. Going on to that old British thing, the weather. We've been floored. We were floored a bit with the Ryder Cup in Celtic Manor. The rain caught us out. We weren't really that prepared for it. We didn't have systems in place. So we've learnt to manage our rigs, built some rainproof covers. It sounds simple, but 3D rigs are bigger. They're hard to keep dry, and we work in a particularly challenging environment. And of course, the technology, as you mentioned, we've grown with some of the big manufacturers. We've worked with them developing super slow motion cameras, handheld cameras that we're now using RF. So for the likes of Steve and Duncan, we've given them more tools now to better use in our sport throughout. So it's been a big improvement, I think. To 2.5 years, it's not very long, but when we look back, the things we were struggling with then, we're very comfortable with now.
Perhaps it's a good time to take a look back. It's hard to compress 2.5 years into 4 minutes, but I think this starts off, we're going to show a clip now. It starts off with the Ryder Cup back in Celtic Manor, maybe ends up with last year's Ryder Cup, to give a sort of sense of evolution of how Sky 3D Sports has evolved.
Yeah, it's about a 4-minute clip that covers not all of the sports, but just a feeling of where we've been and where we are now.
Okay, shall we have a look?
Over 370 live sporting events we've done in 2.5 years now.
There's some fantastic work there, and it looks amazing on the big screen. And also, it should be said that some of that work was produced in association with Can Communicate.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. Steve, I wanted to turn to you. Wondered if you could share with us some of the skills that you use as a director of 3D that perhaps tell the story differently, or tell the coverage of a match, a football match, for example, differently than you would do covering a soccer match in 2D, for example. What are some of the tricks of the trade?
Let me just widen out slightly before then, because I think that what our VT does show is the journey that we've come through with Sky 3D and with 3D in general. I think if you start with the Ryder Cup in 2010 in Wales, for anybody who's a geography student out there, then we started with low positions, which defined the greens very, very well. It was the first time I've been involved in golf, so it was a hairy ride, shall we say. And if anybody saw David's session before this, where he said that they did the first underwater camera, I'm not quite sure, because I'm sure on the first day at Celtic Manor we had some underwater cameras there. I think we learnt a lot from that. We learnt about planning, when we need to get involved in planning. The earlier that we can get involved in planning with the 2D planning, the better. I think we started off with what you would say was a pictorial experience. So a lot of the best shots that you've seen in that montage are close-up shots, shots that are low down and bring the natural layers of 3D into the storytelling. I think as the 3D journey's evolved, then what we've got into is an area which is a balance between pictorial and editorial. So I'll then go back to football, and finding the ideal main camera position for football has been a challenge, and a different challenge within each ground. I think we probably started with let's make it low and different, so there's a distinctively different viewing experience for the 3D viewer. As we evolve and move forward, my fundamental philosophy is that you've got to want to watch the game, and you have to balance the editorial of whatever event that you're broadcasting in sport with that pictorial side. And I think gradually what it's done is it's made me think that the ideal angle for shooting 3D has raised slightly, because you're bringing in that whole storytelling element to the production. And I think, backing up Robin's point, because the reliability of the rigs has improved, and because the general skills base around sports production in 3D has improved, it's meant that the quality of the 3D from each of those positions has improved. So therefore the total 3D experience has improved for the people watching the sport. And therefore you don't end up in a situation where you have to force good pictorial 3D shots into the storytelling as much to show people that there's 3D, because actually the total experience is a 3D experience rather than individual shots that perhaps at the beginning of the journey was where we started from. So I think the whole narrative of 3D has changed, and actually it's just another medium for telling a sports story.
Duncan, we saw some clips there of Wimbledon. I'm not quite sure what years they were, but Cannes been involved with the BBC in producing Wimbledon coverage in 3D for the last 2 years, and also, I believe, this year. Yeah. Perhaps picking up from what Steve said, how has your editorial coverage or technical coverage evolved over the last couple of years? What are the main changes with Wimbledon that we might see this year?
I mean, it's sort of reiterating a point that's already been made, but the main sort of growth or the main abilities that we've gained in the 3D production in that 3-year period, is reliability. If I go back to 2010, which Robin and I worked on the World Cup on behalf of HBS and for, delivering Sony's 3D experience, it was very embryonic, the equipment that existed there, very embryonic, and we weren't using the reality system, we were using Sony's system. It broke down a lot. I still say that we were lucky to, it was working on the first day of, the match we had to shoot. But it did break down a lot. By Wimbledon in 2011, a lot of that reliability, a lot of the abilities that didn't exist within the Sony MPE box and equally with the 3reality SIPS box at that time, started to evolve, and the whole process became much more reliable. When we first went into Wimbledon in 2011, I mean, take my hat off to the All England Club and to the BBC. They were incredibly accommodating. They got us, incredibly good positions, which you can imagine around centre court are shall we say, limited to say the least. But the growth was in using some additional cameras. We started to use some of the new sort of broadcast cameras on RF links. That was a stable platform. It didn't exist, the year before. We started slightly altering the way we cut. We would go to ground quicker, so we'd go to the cameras that are around the net quicker than is probably traditional, because they were giving you such a good experience and you could watch a game from there. But essentially the actual coverage hasn't changed dramatically. It's just in the reliability and the flexibility of the equipment that we've got at our availability.
Well, what do you think 3D gives to a sport like tennis that you wouldn't get from watching it in 2D?
If you watch, there's an awful lot of historical camera positions in sport, and I think that Steve would probably agree. There's a lot of positions that are there because they've always been there, and I think tennis is a classic example. If you look at the Wimbledon main camera, 2D camera position, it is where it is because it was there in 1940, and it's not really moved since then. And when we went from SD to HD, it could have moved dramatically, but it didn't. It stayed where it was.
This is the one below the Royal Box?
No, it's not. It's actually at the opposite end of it. It's
okay.
The broadcast end is actually the opposite end to the Royal Box. But it looks, and it gives you that postage stamp view. Now, the argument is that both players are the same size, and it doesn't give... But you've actually, if you cut that image out and put an SD 4:3 picture over the top of it, it's the same shot. It's the exact same shot. It's just in HD. It's wider now. What we did with the 3D is we did go lower because we debated about doing the camera one shot. We take it and we do use it as we convert it, although we have been playing with maybe putting that as a side-by-side rig. It wouldn't work in all the time. But in going down low, and we are above the court, we're on risers, etc. But it gave us a totally different look at the sport, and it was amazing. We got a lot of tennis players coming in and saying, for the first time, you're seeing, the arc of a shot, and you really genuinely can see the arc of a shot. And obviously, the bigger the screen, the better the experience. But you do get a lot closer and a lot more personal, and you see a lot more of the skills that are deployed by the players. The subtleties in a backhand, etc., etc. You just see a different experience.
Is that something that Robin and Steve you'd agree with as well? Have you seen that?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a lot of sports that we've covered, and in 3D they look much better. It was interesting. There was just a little clip of the Horse of the Year show in there that we did, and it was exactly the same 2D and 3D cut, same positions. We shot it all in 3D. You'd expect to see combinations of fences looking 3D. There's depth in there. What surprised me was you get the whole bolt, the whole size of the horses just comes to life in 3D. So you get a much better experience, in my view, than you would in 2D. And that happens with a lot of things. You saw the Formula 1 cars we did Goodwood Hill climb last year as well. It comes to life for you somehow.
It's the same with the Frankel shoot there that was in 3D. I mean, that was quite a limited production. We had 6 cameras around there. But when you see a tracking camera in 3D and it's tracking with the horses, and you see the horses moving through, you get a sense of space and you get a sense of speed, and you get more of a sense of what's actually going on in that.
So let me just ask Robin and perhaps Steve also about the most recent test that Sky's done with a new sport, Formula 1. We saw clips of it there. What learnings have you got from that? What worked, what didn't, and creatively, what does that bring an audience in 3D that they could not achieve not understand in 2D?
Yeah, look, I think probably it's the most challenging thing we've done, certainly since the first Ryder Cup, probably.
I wasn't involved in it, so I can't comment whether it was more challenging than the Ryder Cup.
And we did get torrential rain, as we often do in 3D. We were going back to the beginning almost. We couldn't put the cameras where we wanted to put them for obvious reasons. It's a racing circuit, so we can't go inside. What we did learn though was the depths you're working with. You're working in huge depths as the cars come towards you, and it was managing that was a challenge at the beginning. some of the positions we had were fantastic. The camera at the end on turn one, the 3D just developed as the cars came down. The handhelds we used in the garages and in the pit lane in 3D, just fantastic. Now, hard to manage because they're fixed interaxial, but as the days went on, and we have 4 days of live programs, as time went on, the cameramen learned how to manage those, and we worked with them to get the best shots that we possibly could. Super slow motion, we did some time lapse, you know, but it was going back to trying to get those good positions that was the challenge for us.
Do you think cameras on cars would work? Were you allowed to place those on the vehicles?
We haven't done any cameras on cars. We did actually put some on in Goodwood, and sometimes they worked, sometimes they didn't. The issues are the environment rather than the cameras. You know, cameras on cars are it's not a good environment for cameras. But there's, you know, and again, if it's forward facing, you've got that dimension there again.
We've done some testing on that, and it very limited, because I mean you've no idea how complex it is to put something on an F1 car. It's not, you don't just bolt it on, that's for sure. But it's a phenomenal shot, absolutely phenomenal shot. When you see it, you get a real rush of, you get a real genuine sense of speed.
Right. Looking down the track as well as perhaps into the drivers?
It's looking down the track is what gives you... The problem you've got is that traditionally that camera position has the driver's head just bobbling around, and so we experimented with just lifting it up slightly, so you saw over it, so you saw a slightly different angle than you normally see, but it was...
So that was a test, Robin. What does that tell us about future plans to broadcast an entire Grand Prix?
We were very lucky to be able to go along to testing. It was a great opportunity for us. It was a great opportunity for us to do something else to put on the 3D channel, but we don't have any other plans.
No other plans?
Just currently, no.
Okay. The biggest event perhaps in sport in the next couple of years is the World Cup. So I'm going to ask you this, Duncan, I know with a bright smile, but Can Communicate was integral to the 25 matches that were covered in 3D in South Africa, contracted by HBS, FIFA's host broadcaster. So I wondered if you could speculate on whether we might see a 3D World Cup 2014, what it might mean if there was in fact no 3D, because FIFA hasn't announced anything just yet.
I've been on record as saying, this was just after the World Cup, if we are filming the World Cup in 2014, then 3D's here, 3D television, I'm not talking about movies or anything like that, but 3D television's here to stay. I would be being honest right now, I'd say the jury's out. It's not the instant decision that one would expect. It's probably in one of the worst places you could put it. There's logistics issues within Brazil, and it's, that is affecting the 2D production as much as it's affecting any 3D production that would happen. So right now I can't answer whether it is or it isn't happening. I know that there have been plans made to undertake it. It's just there's one of finance, one of logistics, and one of is there a desire from broadcasters to take it? Yeah. Which comes on to a question that the rights issue.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, let's talk about rights. I mean, do we think that because there are a limited number of broadcasters in the world capable of covering 3D, is the rights to certain sports hampering the wider adoption of 3D subscriptions, 3D TV? Are rights to 3D an issue? What happens when Sony and Panasonic pull the plug on their sponsorship of certain events, like the World Cup, like Roland Garros and others? Who fills that funding gap?
I think the beginning of your question, you said about people not being able to film it. I don't think that's a question.
But the rights to broadcast it in order to.
Well, the rights are different in every different territory, so I think that's for the individual broadcasters in that territory to determine. What I can say is that UEFA have committed to filming the Champions League final in 3D this year at Wembley. We'll be there doing that and providing that for worldwide rights holders in 3D. I think the rights issue are for the different organisations to decide upon and how they decide, which it applies to all their different sorts of rights, their digital rights, everything is how they choose to allocate them. I think from a creative perspective, which is where we're coming from, we've been shooting 3D for 2.5, 3 years, and we're constantly looking to improve the quality of the output. Formula One management we were very grateful for them to allow us to go and test in their testing session, and we take learnings from all of those things. But going forward with things like that, it needs the management, Formula One management, to agree to those decisions. So I think each of the sports has their own, their own position on that.
Duncan, do you have a view?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, there are certain sports that and certain rights that I think will change going forward. Much as now rights are split up into, you have mobile rights and broadband rights, and I think that going forward, I think 3D rights will probably start to be extracted from the traditional broadcasts. I mean, at this moment, pretty much all rights encompass all other media, and 3D fits under that nice banner, all other media. So consequently, a simple example is I can't go and talk to Sky about Wimbledon, because rightly so, the BBC are the rights holders. So there is, that becomes an issue when you look at certain sports that may have a desire to actually be shot in 3D, but you can't get to a 3D channel.
Do you have anything?
Oh no, I was just going to say, in terms of distribution as well, the penetration of televisions, I believe that 85% of TV sets that are sold over 32 inches are 3D capable. So suddenly you're extending it to a wider audience, which also plays into the rights issue. I think where the rights work best is where they are together. In terms of productions that we've done at Sky, the productions that work best as a whole are where one director can create two outputs.
Right.
So, for example, our darts coverage, one director creates an output for 2D and an output for 3D. Mm-hmm. And it's that element of control from a creative perspective that allows you to maximise the experience for both sets of viewers. Where we've joined and done 3D productions where we've come along with the golf, for example, with the Ryder Cup, and we're working alongside two sets of 2D productions. Obviously, there's certain compromises that we have to make because the bigger productions are going on in 2D. So I think as governing bodies move forward, they have to think about that in terms of their distribution.
Just leading on from that, do you think there's a difference, perhaps a cultural difference, in the way the US producers view 3D sports and the way European producers view 3D sport? In that, can the model of Cameron Pace Group, where it's 5D, where there's one single production for the entire event, can that work over here? Is Sky exploring that with Cameron Pace, for example?
I think the concept of a 5D production is an entirely sensible concept, because we'd obviously be looking to make synergies wherever possible within the productions. I think that the key to it is the balance in that 5D production. Do you have 3D as a byproduct of 2D, which for the 3D experience, my feeling is that you're not getting a maximum 3D experience? Or do you sit down as a whole and look at the total production and go, right, what works for 3D? How does that impact 2D? What are the judgments we make? So a good example is myself and Robin have just worked on recently, Got to Dance on Sky One, where we've extended from last year, where we did the final, my first dancing experience, broadcasting, shall we say, to doing 5 semi-finals and final this year. And very much part of the process last year was I came to it as an add-on to a massive 2D production and worked my way around it. From this year, we involved the 2D production company from mid-November, and we were integrated in our approach to maximise the 3D experience, whilst understanding there were certain things that we had to have synergies on with 2D. So I think the concept of 5D is absolutely a good concept. It's about how you execute that.
Okay.
Yeah, we do quite, we do as much as we can from one truck. I mean, it obviously makes financial sense, and there's a number of sports that it works with. I mentioned Equestrian. I mean, we did the basketball at the O2 not long ago. That was simply an add-on, because we came in as an add-on. We didn't want to destroy anything that the 2D production was doing. We could easily have done it from as a 3D, you know, where the camera positions are, where they are, and the equipment they use. It could have easily been 5D. So there's a lot of situations where that works. Of course, there are some that it doesn't.
And whole heaps of our programs, you know, outside of the sporting arena. I mean, you know, live concerts and, you know, documentaries and a whole variety of other productions. You know, there isn't or rarely is there a 2D and a 3D version. There's a 3D version, and we extract one eye to create the 2D version. Occasionally, we might add some material to it, but you know, mostly not. It's delivered as a 2D production, and quite often we've been commissioned to deliver a 3D production, and then they've looked at it in 2D and said, "Can we have that for the 2D channel as well?" No, don't want any changes to it. So, yeah, 5D is a term right now, but I think I think it's, you know, I would love to be given a greenfield site of Wimbledon Centre Court and say start again. You know, practicality say that isn't going to happen.
I'll just open up to the audience in one moment. Just a final quick question. Conversion, as in live conversion of the 2D feed to the 3D feed, has been anathema for most people to date, apart from a few select shots. Has the technology improved to the extent that we can now see an entire game converted in 3D? I know that certain producers in America are exploring this. Is it possible, or is it still the technology is just nowhere near it and we need to go native all the time?
I mean, in very brief terms, conversion isn't new, and I mean, films have been converted, and some of them have been converted very well. But live, what we've looked at so far doesn't match up to native 3D, but it is better. Technology moves on, and it gets cheaper. So, you know.
What I will say is we've looked at we're always looking at conversions and what we could apply them to and how we would use them within the native 3D environment, and they are improving. You know, the ones that I've seen most recently are pretty good.
Okay.
And we'd look to see how we integrate that into our 3D production.
Okay. Any questions? Yes, please. I think there's a mic coming.
A big problem, I think, with 3D sports is the fact that the motion's not encoded properly. Basically, the faster it moves, the less we see as an audience. But the moment the action stops, it's perfectly clear. So I'm wondering, what is happening about motion reproduction for the future? Is it something that you're looking at in terms of improving the way that you capture motion? It's all the best motion stuff in 3D sports is in the slow-mo. It looks beautiful. But the moment you actually have somebody flying past the camera at 30 miles an hour, it's just a fuzzy mess.
Ultra HD?
Yeah. Look, I mean, we're stuck with 1080/50 at the moment. You know, that's our TV standard, and currently, you know, that's the system we've got to work on. I mean, what we do try and do is get camera angles where we've got the motions happening in front of the frame in 3D rather than chasing the, chasing the images around. And we know that works, but that's a challenge for Steve, who's especially in football, where it's traditionally a camera one game, and that's the way to cover it, and that's the way that.
Well, that's the way I would choose to cover it, because it's a balance of the pictorial and the editorial. I mean, you could choose to cover it in a different way, and different directors may decide on a different way. Have you got a specific example that?
Well, the worst 3D I've ever seen was a sports rugby broadcast, which was shown on a big screen with flicker glasses off a white screen like this. So basically, it was in flicking the image left and right. Plus, it was an interlaced image, which was then.
Which game was that?
Oh, it was a very early rugby game on Sky about 2 years ago, and it was shown in a demonstration for a projector, a digital projector, and the motion was all over the place.
Well, that would probably be more to do with it taking in a 50i signal and trying to play it in P.
Well, yeah, and also they were trying to.
And I would suggest, I don't know who.
They were trying to get it up to 140 hertz.
Because I've seen an absolute. I've seen some of our stuff slated. A thing. Funny enough, we did with Sky a Usain Bolt thing slated, and when we got to the projection house or to the theatre and went in, I mean, it was a mess what they were trying to do to it. I think that was a big issue in the early days of 3D, is actually there was an awful lot of projectionists who didn't know what they were.
Oh no, this was a private demo by a projection company who were the best.
I don't know. I couldn't answer that question, but I'd be very surprised if it wasn't a 50i trying to convert it to 25p or 24p, probably even worse.
It was trying to get it up to 150 hertz with flicker glasses with a single lens projector, and it just couldn't handle it. And but it looked beautiful when it was slow-mo and when it was sharp. It looked absolutely stunning. I can say that a lot of the World Cup was screened in the IBC, and it was screened with it had two discrete HD channels playing into a Sony 4K projector that was playing.
Screened in Europe.
And it was screened in Europe, and we had no problems, other than the Italians complaining about the vuvuzelas.
I think the bigger the screen size, the more the motion reproduction becomes important. Everyone's looking at 47-inch, 50-inch TVs, and it looks good. But I think there's a limit on screen size with this type of motion capture.
I think and I also think the amount of live sport that actually finds its way to cinema is relatively limited. We're working in a television environment. That's our. I know that we screened Wimbledon in the Haymarket and had a great experience. But you are still putting an HD picture through onto a very big screen.
I agree with completely what you're saying about the super motion cameras. I mean, they really do look good. And if we could shoot at 75, it would be great. But unfortunately, we can't at the moment.
But there's no prospect of an improvement in the signal in future. What are you looking at?
I think at the moment. I mean, it's probably a question for Sony, but we're stuck with our.
It's the broadcast pipe, isn't it? It's what you have to broadcast. Your broadcast.
Yeah, it's a television broadcast signal.
Yeah.
I could send you I could quite easily send you a different signal that would be a better quality signal, but the costs of doing that become prohibitive. So you end up taking the same signal.
Any more questions?
What criteria really dictates your selection of specific hardware?
The hardware we're using now.
In terms of specific cameras.
That it works.
Cameras or rigs.
Both. Say the cameras. You were talking about putting a camera on a sort of F1. Obviously, that's got to be a pretty small camera. Or the other cameras you're using, I imagine, either is it because of a sponsorship you're bound to use a Panasonic or a Sony camera?
No, not at all. We work with all the manufacturers to test, to try and develop, especially in 3D, because it's we've come off the baseline. So we work with Sony, we work with Panasonic. We've worked developing both of their handheld cameras. We use a lot of mini cameras. We've got companies that come along with ideas. And we try them out. If it works, and it's something that Steve and the guys will use it, then we use it.
We're always looking to improve the quality of what we're doing. I don't have any particular relationships, but what I do is I work and look and see whether it works for the purpose that we're trying to shoot it with. We made a lot of progress with handheld cameras, with radio cameras, with mini cameras, but it's all about what they deliver, and very much we put them in testing, in live testing often, and then we make the quality decision as to whether we broadcast it or not, or whether we decide that we'll record some of it, take it away and analyse it, and then go back to whoever we're working with to improve it. And we're constantly looking to improve it.
And just to answer the other point, I mean, the equipment we've got currently is equipment that worked for us. We tested before we went on air, and it was really the only hardware that was available on the market at the time.
Yeah, there's a couple of there are now. Sony came out with a solution, a chain that did happen to work with Sony P1s as the cameras because they were small and they were compact and they fit on smaller rigs. When we were first doing at the World Cup, for example, we didn't have P1s. We were using full body cameras, and that was I can tell you a pain. It wasn't great. Fine on the side-by-side rigs, but it meant we could scale down the size of the rig. So really, you know, sort of the whole evolution of 3D has gone along with the evolution of sort of cameras and EVS and everything, you know, everything in the production chain has sort of stepped up to the plate.
And venues, because each different position at each different venue dictates you know, the sizes of the rigs that you can use there. So it's a combination of things that we're factoring, because if we want to get the shot from that certain position, then we may have to compromise other elements of the production in order to get that position and get that shot. We have to be flexible.
Time for one or two more?
Yeah,
Hello.
oh, right, never mind, I'll forget that. I'm just wondering, you talked a lot about sort of the traditional camera positions for tennis. I'm just wondering, is the goal to find, say, in terms of soccer, to find a set of camera positions and editing style, notwithstanding sort of experimentation and always wanting to develop, a way of saying, okay, fine, we've kind of got it now, this is what 3D soccer looks like, this is the language of 3D soccer, as opposed to, well, now, you know, when you watch 2D football, there's a language, there's a style, there's a pace, we know what we're going to get. Is the aim to move towards that for 3D, or is it always, do you want to always be changing it, experimenting, and not try and sort of lock yourself down to that?
I would say I have a certain style. You know, every different director will have a different view as to how they should shoot it. My feeling is that I've got to try and convey the game. It's the editorial story that dominates. I think when you're talking about camera positions, and I reiterate before, each different Premier League ground we go to has a different set of challenges associated with it. A lot of it relating to the structure that currently is in, you know, is there, the ground itself. I sort of think that we've ended up, or we're moving towards a position where, for main camera coverage of football, we're moving to a position where actually probably the marketeers would prefer, which is somewhere between what has been, you would call, a traditional 2D camera gantry. So, for example, a traditional 2D camera gantry would be at Tottenham Hotspur, where you've got a high gantry over the pitch, close to the pitch, looking down. We've in negotiations with Tottenham, we've managed to get a lower camera gantry in there that we've exploited for 3D, and I think what you've seen then is that UEFA, certainly when Tottenham have been involved in European matches, have seized upon that position and said this is a position that works for our marketing department and the advertising. So my personal opinion is it's still fractionally too low for 2D, fantastic for 3D, and so there's probably somewhere in an ideal world with a floating gantry that's just slightly higher than the one that currently exists, slightly higher than the low 3D gantry, and then you've got the game. You can see the game. But each different director will have a slightly different view as to where that ultimate, for football, that ultimate camera one position is. I firmly believe camera one is the position to watch the football game. That's what gives you the best experience, the best overall experience. And then what we do is we work around that. So, and not for reasons of experimentation, but because actually I think that there's certain shots in 3D that work better. So set pieces, so free kicks, penalties. I've used the high behind position to cover that, which if you look at 2D coverage of football, the Italians do at times. You know, some English directors choose to cover penalties with high behind position, so you're very much getting into that creative discussion about exactly what each director thinks is the best way to tell that story. I don't think we experiment for the sake of you know, throwing things in, but I think what we do have to do is keep our minds always open to possibilities, that if we were to move somewhere else, should we be looking at something else? Exactly the same as we do in 2D. You know, as technology moves forward, how do we look to push forward our coverage in both areas? But I do firmly believe it's not just about creating a 10-minute experience that people switch on and go, whoa, yeah, look at that 3D, it all looks different, it's all a different angle. I think what we're doing has to be sustainable because it's telling the story, and the way that we're telling the story in 3D is adding to the event.
I'd also like to just add that you know, if you take, I go back to Wimbledon again, but if I take Wimbledon as a choice, because the 2D camera one position is so high and looking down, it dictated that we had to go down much lower. Probably, you know, in an ideal world, I would be halfway between the two, and that has then dictated that we probably cut too much. You know, we probably cut a little too much, you know, around the cameras, because you can't stay on camera one quite as long as you'd like to. And that is to do with the logistics of being in the, you know, BBC's worldwide camera one shot. You can't be in that. There's a logistics of a wall. There's a small gaps. You're having to work around. So the language is evolving. I'm in agreement with, you know, with the, you know, football is a camera one game, and you think, and I sort of agree with the same with tennis as well, except that you know, the camera one, you know, you spend so much time on camera one that if we just put camera one up as a 2D shot, you know, you'd say, well, there's no 3D anywhere, because the rest of it is probably only 10% of the programming. You know, it's you know, you spend so much time on camera one.
But interestingly, like the golf example, I think what an ideal in golf would be to have jibs around almost every green, because then that gives me flexibility for editorial and pictorial. It means that I can go down low to show you those contours on the green, and then I can move up slightly higher so that you can see where the hole is relative to the putt and the you know, and the golfer, and it would just give me ultimate flexibility. But you know, logistically, when you're looking at covering 18 holes of golf, the actuality of having 18 jibs, it you know, it doesn't happen in 2D. So actually, for golf, we very much have to have that blend of low and contours, with the ability at certain holes to be slightly higher, where the pin position is not necessarily more important, but it gives me more to be able to tell a story with that camera. And I think the evolution of the radio cameras really starts to open up what we can creatively do around sports like that, because then that gives you the flexibility to be able to cover it in the way that you would want to cover it.
Thank you. We've run out of time, I'm afraid. So thank you joining me in thanking Steve, Robin and Duncan for that fascinating conversation.